Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. To this day, the Vietnamese community in Australia has not forgotten the murder of Tran Thi Kim, a mother of two in Sydney, back in April 2025. On that fateful night, the attacker suddenly stormed into her home, restrained her, and forced her into a vehicle right in front of her terrified children. Not long after, she was found lifeless inside a burned-out vehicle parked about 5 miles from her home. The bold and gang-like manner of the crime stunned even federal police and left the public in shock. Fortunately, by late August, the first suspect was caught and faced serious criminal charges. So who was he? And what could drive him to act so cruelly against a woman and her children? Today, stay with me until the very end as we uncover the unanswered questions of this disturbing case. Please note that all the content in this video was carefully researched and compiled by our team from multiple sources. So if there's anything inaccurate or in need of correction, please let us know in the comments so we can update it right away. Before diving into the details, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the gripping stories coming up. Thank you all for being here. Around 10:30 p.m. on the 17th of April 2025, just a few months ago, Australia's 000 emergency hotline received a call about a violent home invasion and abduction on Greenacre Road in Bankstown. The caller was a 15-year-old boy. In extreme panic, he reported that his mother had just been attacked and dragged away by a group of armed men. Neighbors later said they had heard piercing screams coming from the house that night. When local police arrived, they were met with the sight of a shocked 15-year-old and his 8-year-old sibling lying motionless with a severe head injury. The home was in ruins, clearly showing signs of forced entry. Paramedics rushed both children to the hospital. The younger boy had a critical head trauma and had to undergo emergency surgery, falling into a coma after being struck with a baseball bat. Meanwhile, the children's 4-5-year-old mother was still missing. Just over an hour later, around 11:30 p.m., a local resident in Beverly Hills, about 5 miles from Bankstown, reported a suspicious car fire at the dead end of Welfare Avenue, near a park and a highway. Firefighters rushed to the scene and quickly extinguished the flames, consuming a black SUV. When the fire burned out and the smoke cleared, they discovered a body in the back seat. The scene was so disturbing that many firefighters later admitted they were haunted by it. Police immediately sealed off the area. While the victim couldn't be identified at first glance, investigators strongly suspected it was the same woman abducted from Bankstown just an hour earlier. Now, faced with the burned-out vehicle and the unidentified body inside, police realized they were dealing with a particularly brutal murder, meticulously planned down to the smallest detail. That very night, they launched the first steps of the investigation at the Bankstown home. What they found was a haunting scene of chaos. The front door had been forced open, with shattered glass scattered across the floor. The living room was marked by dark blood stains, later confirmed to be from the 8-year-old's head injury. Signs of struggle were everywhere, chairs overturned, belongings strewn about, showing the victim had been violently dragged away. Investigators were shaken as they examined the scene. They could hardly imagine the terror these children endured, watching their mother dragged out of the house and shoved into a vehicle before their eyes. The brutality of this crime far surpassed ordinary cases. From the 15-year-old's testimony, police learned that 4 to 5 intruders in black clothing, wearing masks and carrying handguns and batons, had stormed into the home that night. They struck the boy's younger brother with a baseball bat, held him at gunpoint, and then turned on his mother. After knocking down the 4-5-year-old woman right in front of her children, the group even tore away parts of her clothing, an act so cruel it left the 15-year-old frozen in shock. Moments later, they dragged the nearly unclothed woman out into the street. They forced her into the back seat of a dark SUV waiting at the curb, then sped off into the night. These chilling details left police in Bankstown shaken, as it revealed the criminals were well prepared, striking swiftly and without hesitation, even against women and children. Meanwhile, at the scene of the burning vehicle in Beverly Hills, forensic investigators faced a daunting challenge. The SUV had been completely gutted, leaving behind only a twisted metal frame. The extreme heat had melted plastic and paint, turning it into a carbon grave for the victim. The body inside was badly charred, making visual identification impossible. Because of this, the forensic team had to proceed with extreme caution, carefully collecting every possible piece of evidence. They discovered partially burned clothing scattered nearby, possibly belonging to the victim. Preliminary checks suggested the victim may have been shot before the SUV was set on fire. Investigators also noted the blaze occurred in a secluded spot at the dead end of a quiet street near a park, with only a few houses scattered in the back. A stunned local resident shared that their neighborhood was usually peaceful and had never seen anything so horrifying. This suggested the perpetrators had deliberately chosen the remote spot to dispose of the body and destroy the vehicle, erasing as many traces as possible. The first impressions at both crime scenes helped police form an initial theory about the case. This was a cold act of revenge, carefully planned, not a sudden murder or a random robbery. The victim had been kidnapped right from her own home, a place where she should have been safest. The fact that she was stripped of her clothing and later burned showed the attackers intended not only to destroy evidence but also to humiliate her dignity. The investigative team realized they were dealing with ruthless, experienced criminals. That very night, a special task force called Strike Force Bushfield was launched, bringing together elite homicide detectives from New South Wales and local police. Their highest priority was to uncover the mastermind behind this shocking crime, and although instincts suggested that the victim was the same woman kidnapped in Bankstown, investigators still had to carefully gather scientific evidence to confirm her identity. If this assumption was correct, the victim in both cases was Kim Tran, 45 years old, the mother of 2 boys, ages 8 and 15. DNA samples were quickly collected from her children, along with fingerprints from personal belongings in the house, to compare with the remains. But because the victim's body was severely burned, extracting DNA was far from simple. The police decided to conduct an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death and to provide a more reliable means of identification. While waiting for the forensic results, the investigation shifted toward gathering background information about the missing woman. Through neighbors and friends, police learned that this Vietnamese-born woman lived a quiet and kind life, never involved in conflicts. However, one important detail stood out. Her husband, Tung Nguyen, 45 years old, was away at the time. According to relatives, he had flown to Queensland for a business trip and was not in Sydney when the incident occurred. Police immediately contacted the husband. Upon hearing the news, he rushed to catch the earliest flight back to Sydney to identify his wife and care for his children. As investigators dug deeper, they faced another obstacle. Kim Tran had almost no relatives in Australia. She had immigrated more than 10 years earlier, and aside from her husband and children, she had no close family nearby. This made it extremely difficult for the police to notify next of kin and gather information about the victim's connections. Just then, the first real lead emerged from a neighbor's security camera. The footage captured the kidnappers forcing a woman into a vehicle. Although the footage was blurry and didn't clearly show any faces, it was enough to confirm the testimony of the 5-year-old boy. A white sedan and a black SUV had appeared in front of the victim's home at the time of the incident. This gave police grounds to expand their search through traffic cameras along a stretch of about 5 miles, from Bankstown to Beverly Hills, in order to track down the convoy connected to the suspects. A vast network of both public and private security cameras was pulled for data. Grainy images captured around midnight showed the 2 vehicles speeding down the highway. Investigators pieced these clips together to reconstruct their movements. Police also called on anyone who might have noticed suspicious activity on the night of the 17th of April to come forward. Almost immediately, several residents provided tips. One person heard engines revving loudly near the victim's home around 10:30 p.m. Another recalled seeing a plume of smoke rising in Beverly Hills at about 11:30. While no one had seen the suspects' faces, these statements helped strengthen the sequence of events. By connecting all the information, police established a fairly detailed timeline. The group of perpetrators arrived at the victim's house around 10:30 p.m., carried out their plan quickly, and then transported the victim to Beverly Hills. By roughly 11:30, they ended the victim's life and set a fire before escaping just moments ahead of residents spotting the blaze. Significantly, traffic cameras showed the white sedan on Canterbury Road around 10:45 p.m., driving in the same direction as a black SUV trailing a few hundred yards behind, indicating that they were likely traveling together. Near Beverly Hills, a private security camera captured both vehicles turning onto Welfare Avenue. About 15 minutes later, another camera showed only the sedan racing back out. This led to the theory that the suspects had taken the victim to a secluded spot, committed the act, torched the SUV, and then all climbed into the sedan to flee, abandoning the burned-out vehicle behind. The sedan then vanished, heading southbound on the highway. It may have driven straight toward Melbourne that same night. Tracing its route proved difficult since it was using fake plates. Around this time, the victim's husband returned home. In his first session with the police afterward, he appeared completely devastated. When he was brought to identify the body, he painfully recognized his wife's personal features along with a charred piece of gold necklace found nearby. More importantly, when police pressed him with questions about who might have wanted to harm his family, the husband hesitated for a moment before revealing a chilling secret. He had previously been involved in a meth trafficking ring. According to him, he had been frequently traveling between Sydney and Melbourne, doing business with a group of Vietnamese criminals in a large-scale synthetic drug operation. But recently, conflicts had arisen between him and that group because a significant shipment mysteriously disappeared. He suspected the group might blame him or that someone had embezzled the shipment, causing millions in losses, prompting them to take action as punishment. At this point, investigators immediately formed a new hypothesis. The motive for the crime likely stemmed from a feud within the drug trade, and the innocent woman had become a sacrificial pawn in the dispute. On the 22nd of April 2025, the final forensic results confirmed the husband's information. DNA from the teeth of the body matched the DNA of the children. This allowed police to officially conclude the victim was Kim Tran, 45 years old. Her identity was publicly confirmed, closing the chapter on the search for the tragic victim. However, at the same time, this opened a new and challenging phase in the investigation to trace the perpetrators of the tragedy. Alongside confirming her identity, evidence collection proceeded urgently. At the victim's house, the forensic team meticulously searched for any trace left by the attackers, including fingerprints and shoe prints. Unfortunately, the assailants had worn gloves and concealed their faces, a highly professional move, leaving almost no usable fingerprints or identifiable images. Still, police recovered a piece of black tape near the doorway, likely used to restrain the victim, and then discarded. This tape was sent for testing to check for DNA or sweat traces from the perpetrators. Meanwhile, at the site of the burned SUV, specialists worked to collect any remaining evidence. The metal license plate had been removed, indicating a deliberate attempt to erase vehicle registration traces. However, the vehicle's engine serial number remained identifiable. A quick check showed that the SUV was registered in the state of Victoria, but the listed owner was a shell company, suggesting it had been used by criminals before being disposed of. Additionally, shell casings found in the vehicle were sent for ballistic analysis to identify the type of gun used. The results indicated a .22 caliber handgun, a type commonly seen in criminal gangs. Another line of investigation focused on phone calls. When questioning Mr. Tung Nguyen, the police were given a chilling clue. Shortly before Miss Kim Tran was killed, his phone received a series of blackmail messages with timestamps of 20 minutes left, 10 minutes, and 5 minutes, like countdown messages. However, at that time, Tung was on a business trip, and his phone was either out of range or turned off, preventing him from receiving the messages immediately. The lack of response from the husband likely infuriated the kidnappers, fueling their determination to strike the hostage brutally. At the same time, the ransom messages indicated that the criminal group had intended to negotiate before taking violent action. It's very likely they had demanded a substantial ransom. When the ultimatum was ignored, they decided to carry out their threat in the most brutal way. Piecing these details together painted a clearer picture of the perpetrators: organized, premeditated, and operating across state lines. As a result, New South Wales Police coordinated with Victoria Police to expand the investigation, sharing information about the drug network that the victim's husband had been involved in. Unsurprisingly, Victoria Police reported they were also monitoring a Vietnamese gang suspected of large-scale methamphetamine production. On the 19th of April 2025, just 2 days after the murder, Victoria Police raided a remote farm in Springdale, west of Ballarat, where the gang was suspected of operating a methamphetamine lab. They seized chemicals and equipment used to manufacture methamphetamine, strengthening their case against the criminal network. However, the raid did not result in any arrests, as the gang apparently got wind of the situation and successfully dispersed the drugs before the police arrived. Still, this discovery confirmed that the criminal network operated across state lines and with significant sophistication. At this point, the investigation focused on the husband's network within the drug operation. Using his statements, police compiled a list of names he had recently interacted or done business with. From this list, a 29-year-old Vietnamese man living in Bankstown, the An Han Nguyen, stood out as a close associate of the victim's husband. Intelligence indicated that The An Nguyen served as a link between the Victoria Drug Group and certain operatives in Sydney, making him a crucial supply chain node. Notably, he had appeared in federal drug trafficking records but had no formal criminal record. His residence in Bankstown, just a short distance from the victim's home, raised further suspicion. Police questioned whether he could have leveraged his familiarity with the area to organize retaliation against a colleague's family. Investigators began secretly surveilling the An Nguyen. Administrative records showed he rented a modest apartment in Bankstown, was single, and had no clear occupation. In the weeks following the crime, the An Nguyen remained in Sydney, keeping a low profile, appearing inactive and disconnected from the chaos outside. Police quietly gathered his phone data, including call logs, messages, and location on the night of the 17th of April. Results showed that during the crime, the An Nguyen's phone appeared in Bowral and was turned off around 10 p.m., only to be reactivated hours later at a different location. This was a suspicious sign, coinciding with the timing of the kidnapping, suggesting he may have deliberately powered down his phone to avoid being traced while committing the crime. Furthermore, financial analysis revealed that immediately after the night of the 17th of April, the An Nguyen received a large sum in his bank account and quickly withdrew it in cash. This could have been payment or operational costs for the hit. Based on increasingly solid evidence, New South Wales Police decided to act. At 5 a.m., on the 28th of August 2025, over 4 months after the crime, the Raptor Task Force, alongside the Major Crimes Unit, raided the An Nguyen's apartment in Bankstown. Nguyen was caught in bed, completely taken by surprise and unable to resist. Police quickly secured his phone, computer, and several documents for the investigation. At Bankstown Police Station, the An Nguyen was subjected to intense questioning. As expected from a seasoned criminal, he remained silent and refused to admit to anything. Nevertheless, authorities had enough evidence to proceed with charges. On the afternoon of the 28th of August 2025, the An Nguyen was formally charged with murder and causing grievous bodily harm, specifically related to the attack on the 8-year-old boy. Police publicly declared that Nguyen had orchestrated the kidnapping and caused Kim Tran's death, even though he had not pulled the trigger himself. While a key suspect was in custody, the investigation was far from over. New South Wales Police believed Nguyen did not act alone, hiring 3 hitmen to carry out the kidnapping and murder. These 3 gunmen remain at large. Police stated they would pursue them relentlessly. Authorities also coordinated with federal forces to trace the criminal organization behind the plot. The case thus entered a new phase, from investigating a single homicide to probing an entire mafia network spanning Australia. A pressing question arose. Who exactly was the An Nguyen? And had he acted out of revenge against a colleague, targeting Kim Tran and her children? Investigators found that the An Nguyen, 29, was an Australian of Vietnamese descent. Born and raised within Sydney's Vietnamese community, he was no stranger to the underground scene, considered a key figure in a Victoria-based drug operation. Despite his young age, Nguyen had become deeply involved in federal drug trafficking, emerging as an ambitious young kingpin. Trusted by his superiors, he transported narcotics between Melbourne and Sydney and managed conflicts within the criminal network. In other words, the An Nguyen functioned as both a local leader in Sydney and a ruthless enforcer when needed to protect the organization's interests. Yet before his arrest, he had no serious criminal convictions, making him somewhat invisible to the law despite active involvement in the underworld. Privately, few knew Nguyen beyond his exterior as a single, independent businessman. He rented an apartment in Bankstown, just a few blocks from the victim's home, but was often away. His connection to Kim Tran's family was primarily through her husband. Nguyen was reportedly close to the husband as a business associate. Likely due to this familiarity, when a shipment went missing within the gang, Nguyen suspected betrayal or carelessness by his associates. Acting on orders or his own initiative, he decided to retaliate by attacking the family, sending a message of warning. Thus, Nguyen's motive appeared to be both dispute resolution and pressure on the husband to recover the lost contraband. Nguyen's actions demonstrated chilling ruthlessness and calculated coldness. He did not act directly, instead orchestrating the scheme from behind the scenes, hiring others to carry out the dirtiest parts. His indifferent cruelty sparked outrage comparable to that directed at the direct perpetrators. Psychologically, Nguyen exemplified an educated criminal. He understood both the underworld rules and legal risks, carefully concealing his role. Instead of hands-on action, he employed hired guns and fabricated alibis. He even remained in the area post-crime, either taunting authorities or confident that his plan was flawless. However, reality proved that no matter how clever he was, he could not escape the police. Ultimately, the law caught up with him, bringing him into the light to answer for his crimes. After arrest, the An Nguyen was promptly presented at Bankstown Magistrates Court on the 29th of the month. At this hearing, he did not file for bail. It's hardly surprising given the extreme severity of the case. The chances of release were practically zero. The magistrate also denied bail, placing the An Nguyen in custody pending trial. Outside the courthouse, defense attorney Julie Nguyen stated on behalf of her client that this was merely the opening stage of legal proceedings, and her client would not be guilty of the charges. In other words, the An Nguyen intends to deny all allegations in the upcoming trial. For now, the direct accomplices remain at large, leaving Nguyen as the sole defendant facing the bench in the forthcoming hearings. This could complicate the case, as he might attempt to shift blame onto these unknown associates to lessen his own role. However, given the evidence already gathered, legal analysts believe such a strategy would likely fail to convince a jury. According to the charges, he faces first-degree murder for Kim Tran and causing grievous bodily harm to her 8-year-old son. If convicted, he could face life imprisonment without parole, the harshest penalty under Australia's criminal justice system. As of now, the official trial is still ahead. The An Nguyen remains in custody, awaiting his court date, with his lawyer describing him as prepared to prove his innocence, though public opinion views it as nothing more than denial. And you believe this man is truly innocent as he claims? If so, where is the real perpetrator? Share your thoughts with me in the comments below. If you feel today's story deserves more attention, help us out with a like and a subscribe so you can follow more thrilling stories in the future. For now, we'll see you in the next video.